Joining me now is author of When China Rules the World, Martin Jacques, and Dr. Paul Dorfman, who is from the Energy Institute at University College London. Good afternoon to you both, gentlemen. I'll come to you first, if I can, Dr. Dorfman. We were just hearing there from Vince Cable the concerns that Theresa May had as Home Secretary. She has now in a position as Prime Minister to be able to do something about those concerns. Do you think she's right to have worries over national security over this deal, in light of the revelations we've heard today about this Chinese investor's activities in the United States?
Yes, it seems to be eminently sensible. I mean, Australia today, we've just learnt, has also moved to block £10 billion power goods sale to China over security reasons. So there are very good reasons to rethink this. There are two major reasons. Firstly, questions of hacking, of seeding data, of gaining access to our key nuclear energy infrastructure. And that is a real issue and a real problem. The second is more profound geopolitical military implications, given the fact that one of the Chinese corporations involved in Hinkley is also a Chinese nuclear military corporation.
Martin Jacques, how worried are you about the revelations today? Do you feel that the UK is choosing cash over national security when getting into bed with the Chinese?
No, I don't think that. I think that the project at Hinkley has been long considered in all its various aspects. There's been, obviously, it's a complicated and difficult question. But I think that the general view, which developed under the previous government, that developing a good relationship with China economically is extremely important. So I don't share these misgivings, although I'm happy to see what turns up.
Well, there's developing a good relationship, and then there's leaving us vulnerable to attack by another nation. I mean, where do you draw the line? The main concerns coming from experts reportedly outside and inside government is that the Chinese could use their role to build weaknesses into computer systems, which could effectively, worst case scenario, allow them to shut down Britain's energy production at will. I mean, let the Chinese invest in food and drink, in property and finance, but allowing them into the country's infrastructure, that does leave us vulnerable if relations between the UK and China were to sour in the future.
Well, I think we've got to have a strategic view that we need to have a good relationship with China. I think this kind of, sort of reds under the beds, back to the Cold War kind of language is inappropriate for dealing with China, because China is a completely different kettle of fish in many respects. Now, China, in the area of nuclear power, it seems to me, certainly Hinkley, where all China's going to do is provide a third of the finance, or £6 billion in relationship to it, is a perfectly reasonable way to go about things. Now, also, let me say something about this story today. I mean, we can't treat this story as fact. It is not yet established fact. It is a case being brought by the Americans. Now, actually, the language of the story is quite lurid in terms of what the Americans are saying in relationship to it, and I don't really buy into that. The Americans have a particular take on China, which is basically not to let them in as far as possible, because they see them as a threat. But the threat is a sort of geopolitical threat. It's not, it's about the challenge to America as a global power. And could I just note that in the story, the guy that's supposed to be the offender is charged under a 1946 law designed to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons that has never previously been successful. So I think we're rather rushing to judgment here about a case which, from the sound of it, is unlikely ever to be successful.
OK, Mr Jacques, so you don't have any particular concerns. Dr. Paul Dorfman, are you perhaps more concerned? I mean, we aren't talking about China investing in Weetabix or Pizza Express, as they are in this country. We're talking about them having a heavy stake in the country's critical infrastructure. We are handing over an immense amount of power to another nation.
For China, Hinkley is a lost leader. China will be the deep pockets for Hinkley on the understanding, on the promise that they will be allowed to build, maintain and operate their own reactor at Bradwell, the closest reactor to London. Now, this gives ample opportunity to do what China does best in terms of hacking. And let's be clear about this. There's no question but China is currently providing both ballistic missile and nuclear technology to unstable states like Pakistan and Iran, and has in the past provided both of those forms to North Korea. So the notion that China is good on nuclear and that we should embrace Chinese involvement in nuclear is deeply, deeply problematic.
Martin Jacks, that's a very good point. I mean, what is it in it for China in investing in our nuclear technology? I mean, critics of Hinkley Point have called it a white elephant. They've said that actually this is expensive. You know, it isn't going to do what it could do. There are other more affordable options the government could be ploughing on ahead with. This is nothing more than a vanity project to symbolise the coming together of the two nations. So what is in it for China if they're not using it for their own gain?
Well, I think that the Chinese do have an economic interest in this. You see, the Chinese economy has been expanding so quickly, and of course it's got this additional problem of relying hitherto on extremely dirty sulfurous coal, hence a lot of the pollution, that it's basically got a two-pronged approach. It's now the leader in solar energy, solar panels and so on, and in wind power. And at the same time, it's now responsible for the construction of a large number of nuclear power reactors. So it's now got 30 years experience of this, and they haven't had a serious accident. What's the Chinese interest in this? I think the Chinese interest is that it would very much like to be able to export this technology to other countries, because, you know, it's a major industry as far as the Chinese are concerned, and they need to steadily move up the value chain because they cannot rely on the kind of cheap products that they've had in the past. So it's a perfectly rational, understandable approach by the Chinese. And I think what Paul said about Pakistan and North Korea, I mean, you know, where are you coming from on this? I mean, you know, the Chinese actually, as a global power, which they are becoming, have behaved generally in an extremely responsible way. It's not true to say that they're threatening this nation and threatening that. On the contrary, the Chinese have emphasized their peaceful rise. And as many people have said, and Vince Cable is, for example, who you had the interview with earlier on, the clip, has said, you know, the Chinese behave in a very responsible way in his experience, and he was the business secretary.
OK, they act in a responsible way. But Dr. Paul Dorfman, I'll put this to you then. Why did Australia today block a move for Chinese investment in their infrastructure? Why do they not trust the Chinese, and why are we appearing to? What do they know that we don't?
Well, they've blocked £10 billion worth of Chinese investment in their power grid over specifically security reasons. And they've said this and they've done this for those specific reasons. Added to the fact is that the reputable Nuclear Material Security Index rates China as almost bottom in relation to how well it guards, how well it preserves, how well it deals with its nuclear inventory. The wider geopolitical question is this. If China would seek to enhance proliferation elsewhere, in other words, to export nuclear elsewhere, it generally does so in unstable countries. So there are some key problems here. Why would we, the UK, wish to get into bed with China over questions of nuclear when China is clearly problematic on nuclear? Now, if there's a problem for us being explicit with that, that's not a problem. We can reframe the issue in the context of the failing and failed French EDF EPR reactor, which is 3 times over cost and 3 times over time in Finland and France. So there's no problem. We don't need to take China to task. We can just slide out gracefully saying, excuse me, the reactor is no good, the deal is bad, we need to move on.
Well, Martin Jacks, I wonder how that would go down if we do slide out of the deal with China, because we're led to believe in this world post-Brexit that we need China more than ever. What would it do to relations if this project were to be paused indefinitely?
Well, I can't think of anything more hypocritical than what Paul has just said, because his whole line has been to say China is a huge security threat. And then he says we're going to pull out with on economic grounds. I mean, this is completely insincere. And the Chinese are not stupid. They understand the implications of this argument. And their response, if Britain pulls out of this, will be, I think, the ambassador's letter article in this case, in this instance, made it very clear that there will be repercussions. And the repercussions are, in a situation where Britain is desperately now in need of new global partners in the context of Brexit, that China, which is the key developing country, the second largest economy in the world, by 2030, it will be twice the size of America, responsible for 1/3 of global GDP, is an absolutely crucial partner for Britain in the future. And we should not be cutting our nose to spite our face.
Dr. Dorfman, when you put it like that, China have got us, really, haven't they?
That's not the case. China did lead Osborne by the nose, and everybody understands this. China plays economic hardball, and it does so for its own interest, as we all do. But China is clever. China knows what's going on. There is a distinction between critical nuclear infrastructure and the rest. There is a key difference. Let's be clear about this. No other OECD country would let China within 1,000 miles of its critical nuclear energy infrastructure. Now, investing in other things, that's not a problem. And China will continue to seek, for very particular reasons, to invest in UK. For very specific and particular reasons, China would not wish to isolate the UK from its economic world.
OK, Dr. Paul Dorfman and Martin Jacques, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, but a very interesting discussion on whether the UK should still be doing business with China in light